Hello, good evening, namaskar, and welcome to the Independent Talk. I am your host, Anjan Chakraborty, and I bring you this Independent Talk series that seeks to chronicle the lives of independent journalists around the world. This talk focuses on their professional lives, their success, their learnings, their challenges, and the wonderful stories and content that they are producing in the world of journalism. Once we get to know their stories, we learn a lot about independent journalism as a career path and how one should go about it. Without any more delay, let me introduce our guest for today, Saurav Kumar. Saurav is a microbiologist turned independent journalist, and he is based in Muzaffarpur, Bihar. He has been reporting on rural India, public health, and education since 2018. His work has been published in Livemint, the Caravan, Firstpost, the Wire and NewsClick, flagging contemporary challenges of the transgender community and tribals are some of his recent quests in ground reporting. Welcome, Saurav, to the Independent Talk, and thank you for making time to tell us about your journey and your story into independent journalism. Now, before I begin, I'll set some ground rules for this talk show. So I'll have few questions for Saurav first. And as Saurav tells us the story of his journey, if you have any questions for Saurav, please ask them in the chat room. I will take those questions to Saurav during the second half of this show. And it's only a 1 hour talk that we have. So I'll try to accommodate all of them if I can. Saurav, thank you once again for agreeing to join the Independent Talk and sharing us your story and as an independent journalist. So my first question to Saurav, how did your journey as an independent journalist begin? To be very specific for you, how and why does a microbiologist turn into an independent journalist? ये journey आपका कैसे शुरू हुआ? How did it start?
First of all, thank you very much, Anjan, and I'm honored for getting this opportunity. अपनी छोटी सी जो experience है उसे share करने का मौका मिला. So to start with, this the transition from life sciences, that is being a microbiologist, to social sciences, that is journalism, has a background. That background was an incident which happened with my very close friend's mother. She was denied treatment in a Bihar's largest government hospital, and later she was treated at a private hospital, and subsequently she's no more. So that event was a trigger to me. And though I was a microbiologist, socially I was very active during my weekends. The life in Bangalore, which I used to be part of. So while doing that, at one point I lost interest in working in an MNC, and I thought that I should go back to Bihar because I was about to take a leave, and these things happened in that time frame. So when I was on a leave, I thought to visit that particular hospital in which this incident happened, and that is Patna Medical College and Hospital in Patna. So I went there, I saw everything, and I just planned to interact with patients who come all from far-flung different corners of Bihar. And while this process started, it took me 7 days to visit each and every department of that hospital. A- and while doing that, every day I used to come back, and evening I used to sit and I used to jot my experiences and what other people said, what are the challenges they are facing, was the reality of the hospital, of every department, into the Microsoft Word document. This happened over a week, and I went back to Bangalore, and I decided to step out of what the MNC culture was all about. So because I was really traumatized, you can say, and it was a make or break moment for me. So I decided to leave Bangalore, and in June 2018, I came back to my village, not even city. I decided to reside in my village house because I was very pretty clear with my affinity towards writing. Like, what are the issues I am attracted towards? What are the things what are the things I need to focus? And a reference point in journalism like P. Sainath and Sankarshan Thakur, I was very clear what I need to step in. So my base was a village, and from there, this particular genre of covering rural India starts. And coincidentally, all the people who visit very large government hospitals in any district of Bihar, unfortunately, they hail from villages, because anyhow, Bihar is 80% of village. It resides in villages, rural Bihar. So I started writing, and it was one portal, Newsd. It exists now in Delhi. I started contributing ground reports for them, and I should mention that I never wrote opinion pieces for anyone. For me, journalism is ground reporting. Though I don't hail from that background of journalistic studies, but what I got to learn from other people, experts, and by hearing, that is how this journey starts. That
That's I mean it's quite a story actually. It's quite a background story. So something happened to your friend,
Yeah.
the story that was very close to your
Hmm.
heart, and you decided to give up your career as a microbiologist and started writing and
Yeah.
became an independent journalist. So
Yeah.
it's quite a story to hear. Now, during this journey, I mean, Spring, so you started around 2018
Yeah.
and now it's 2021.
Hmm.
And this entire period, you have been doing rural reporting.
Yeah.
And you have primary focus is, as you have mentioned, is rural health, education, public health, and rural India in general, the problems there.
Yeah.
And you have reported for your work has been published in a plethora of independent as well as mainstream media companies. So during this journey as a rural independent journalist, which are the stories which, if you can share,
Yeah.
that you that were the most satisfying when you were doing ground reporting and you saw those stories published? Which, if do you remember one or two such stories that were the most satisfying?
Yeah. Absolutely. I would talk about the most recent one. It was this pandemic. The second While the second wave was on the peak in the month of May, it took me like, you can say, 5 days for me to cover more than 17 to 18 districts of Bihar, and the story was on defunct ventilators.
Oh,
The PM cares ventilator Bihar got in total count of 500, and to every district it was allotted district hospital. And I knew that these things don't work on ground. So this wave, the pandemic was all about oxygen crunch, and ventilators are the uh, prime, you can say, subject of it. So I covered all 38 districts through my sources, but over ground it was more than 20. And it got published in the month of May, the first week of May. It got published by the NewsClick. and I was not aware of it. I was keep on reporting. The reporting continued, and suddenly a call comes to me from Delhi that Ravish featured that story on NDTV uh, as in his primetime show. Because in that process, I came to know that while picking up a story, there are several layers of cross checking and verification, all from his district correspondents and officials and all. So he quoted 3 to 4 paragraphs of this story, and uh, after I came across that news, it was really a satisfactory moment for me, because challenges of an independent journalist, and what are the things. There is no chance of getting magnification of any kind in this thing. But as I have learned, you need to be unstoppable in this field. If you stop, you will get frustrated and you'll just fail. So that this was the recent experience. It was about public health infrastructure. And last pandemic, the story was once I did a story on combined epidemic and pandemic impact, which was happening simultaneously in the state, in the district of Muzaffarpur. There is a epidemic occurring since 1995 in our district, in which toddlers, small children, they die out of malnourishment, and it's called AES, acute encephalitis syndrome, which in 2019 wreaked havoc in the state, and more than 500 deaths were reported. So last year, when the pandemic surged in the month of April, that was the time frame of the same epidemic. Every year it breaks out. So it was a very big challenge. Right? It was a very big story, which I was surprised and shocked too, that no one focused on it, because in normal years it occurred in crunch of resources. People died, and 2020 was the first wave of COVID-19 pandemic. So could have imagined clearly what was the threat all about, how much large it was. It was going to eclipse lives like in a moment, and it was a double-edged sword kind of a moment. So I started working on it. I visited a family. It's Musahar. We would call as Mahadalits Musahar.
Okay.
Still they are known for eating rats and all. So they are the most backward community of Bihar. So in a Musar family, two girls of age 8 and 5, they died back to back in 2 days, and out of this AES disease, and they were predominantly malnourished. So when I cross-checked with the district authorities, the hospital, there were no like, you can say, facilities for the epidemic and for the pandemic. So it was a hollow situation, and I reported this, and I pitched it to Caravan, and Caravan like picked it up, and it was a long story. And why it was satisfactory to me, because Caravan is a reputed in the media fraternity, we all of us know. And it does not pick up reports or something like anyhow. In a moment of like heated moment, it does the cherry picking of the stories. It was very descriptive. It was gone through over several editings, and it got published in the month of June. So that was very satisfactory for me. Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, primarily, I mean, when you talk about the stories that are satisfactory, uh, a it's unfortunate that the stories are primarily about public health or the lack of it,
Absolutely.
and also it's also a story of how such rural issues and problems, when it comes to public health, they don't get the desired uh, limelight in national media, or
Absolutely.
they don't even get covered enough. in national media. That's another challenge when it comes to rural reporting. Getting those rural problems and issues addressed at a national level is another side of that story. I mean, okay, so I'll move on to the next question, and that is about as a journalist, as an independent journalist, uh, how do you pitch your stories to media outlets? I mean, how is there a process that is there, or is it something that there is a format that you follow? How do you do that? How does that process of pitching to a story happen in your case?
Uh, it goes in a manner like earlier I was, as I said, I don't have a media background, so it took me, like you can say, frankly, to be very frank, more than a year to learn, like how to pitch stories. Even stories are to be pitched. Earlier, I used to send the draft, and many a times I was dodged badly. I saw portals using that opinion report from any sources, which were totally based on my uh, reporting. So that is how this is how I got to learn ki I need to pitch a story. For that for that procedure, I need to frame that story into very small paragraphs, which would contain a bit of figures, because what I saw in story pitching, when you have conclusive details, appropriate details with figures, place, time, date, and all, uh, uh, like it is less prone to rejection. In sense qualitative wise, I have met many rejections, you can, I would say, but chances lessen down when you appropriately conclude the story in a frame, not going left and right, beating around the bush, not speaking about history and anything about it, because story content deserves that description along with introduction and all. And I personally, I maintain a word limit, because as I saw different foreign, you can say, foreign portals, uh, I maintain a word limit of not more than 250 words, and within 250 words we can have good enough a pitch, which would include figures and instances, like example of any policy un- being, like it was claimed to be unveiled but it did not happen in the year in which it was claimed. These small details, with small details, I just go ahead and, uh, by now the frequency of rejection has come down a bit,
I
yes.
mean, that comes from experience. So you have, like, as you said, the first year you spent primarily learning,
Certainly.
and you have faced rejection. But after you have spent hundreds and thousands of pitches, you learn from that experience about how to draft a
Exactly.
perfect pitch.
Exactly.
Although there is nothing called perfect, but as you said, it will lessen the amount of rejections. How to draft. So it's 250 words.
Yeah.
Be very specific.
Hmm.
And you're saying if you can quote certain figures and
Yeah.
facts in that pitch, that is very, very helpful.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, as you mentioned, and my next question comes from what happens after a pitch. So there are two things that can happen after a pitch. The editor that you have pitched, the media organizations that you have pitched may approve that pitch and ask you to send a descriptive report. And the second thing that can happen is also they might say not approved, rejected, we don't want the story. And it is part and parcel of an independent journalist's life to face rejection when it comes to a story being not approved. So it's also plays into the mind of a journalist psychologically, I guess. How does how does one tackle such rejection? Because it can be frustrating at times, because you think, and I think not just you, every journalist If they have a story in their hand, they think that it's a great story. Every journalist, every story they write on, or every story idea that they have, they think it is one of the great stories. So they want that story to be published. But you face rejection. Somebody says, we don't want it. So it suddenly gives you a sense of frustration, disappointment. How do you tackle that? As you said at the very beginning, that what you have learned is that you have to go on. In independent journalism, you have to continue to go on while facing rejections.
Yeah.
So how do you tackle that emotionally? How do you tackle that? Or is there, I mean, do you take it, you have probably told yourself this is part of the job, so it's okay. How do you tackle that? How do you tackle rejection?
Uh, it is, I think, an inevitable part of any independent journalist's life. But in my case, to be very frank, initially it was uh, I was never ever very you can say uh, हिंदी में उसे कहते हैं महत्वाकांक्षा. I did not have lot many desires having my story getting accepted in one shot, because I knew my backdrop. I was very very aware about my limitations, and initially like about the first 10 to 20 stories which I wrote got a rejection which did not create an impact on my psychology, because I was aware I am lagging somewhere or the other, and I worked on them subsequently. In middle of my career of 3 years, a time came where I think that my effort was absolutely 100%. The content was, from my eyes, as you said, everyone thinks the report is very very valid enough to be published. But from the other end, it doesn't get the due respect or the due acceptance, whatever you say it. So at that point of time, yes, pressure builds upon. And if I am a independent journalist, I would not hesitate in accepting the fact that what I'm doing is doing for my livelihood. So rejection means a bit of full stop to my earning of one report. So the question of livelihood always keeps sticking me into my head. That is the thing I said. If I stop, everything is gone. So in a month, I have a target of 15K, 20K I need to earn. And if this thing is consciously there in your head, means a person like me will not sit down after n number of rejections also. And parallelly, I keep on surfing the videos of senior journalists who have been working with BBC Hindi, people like P Sainath and all. So these people, you can say, from the media fraternity, who keep a very high position, have been an inspiration for me. So after listening to them, after seeing them speaking on the podium, or their impressive writing, which created something, which created a wave into the fraternity, this gives me a relief. I can restart. I can restart into it. So that is what happens. And
I think,
now,
yeah.
yes.
No, please continue.
No, that is how I do. And now I think I am very very you can say stubborn into it. uh, the only thing which I demand from the media fraternity to whom I pitch the story is to get a response, either yes or no. Not getting a response, it pisses off, because you don't know, you're in a blank. It's a gray zone, not black and white. So yes or no doesn't matter. If it is no, then I will start with more rigor and push. Yes, that is.
Thank you for sharing that insight. My next question to you, that apart from a story getting rejected, there are other challenges for a independent journalist. I mean, you're working on your own, you are going to different places on the ground, and sometimes you might face some hostile kind of an environment, and it may not be hostile that brings you physical harm, but it can be hostile that people are not bothered to welcome you or not bothered to speak to you. So there are other challenges on the ground that happens. So what are those kinds of challenges, and how you have faced them, and more specifically how you have tackled them as a journalist working on the ground?
Uh, this has happened, I think, many a times, that an independent journalist doesn't have an identity in front of the society, be it any layer of society. They don't recognize that anyone can be an independent journalist without some or the other ID card. Okay, first thing. Second thing, if also they recognize your word, like at many police checking point during elections, I was being stopped, but many a places I got this review that अरे आपके पास आईडी कार्ड नहीं है तो फिर क्या मतलब है पत्रकारिता का. So this hinders your penetration to the place, desired place which you target. And recently it happened, a week back I was in Bastard. I desired, it was in my plan to go Bijapur district, where the protests of tribals are happening against the police camps. So to have that penetration into that tribal hamlet, it was not at all possible for me, because there were 7 police camps in at the distance of 130 kilometers, one after the other, and they had just one question: "आप कहाँ से आए हैं?" If I say that I am a journalist, what's the proof? So this is means you can when we listen, it seems to be a very small problem of identity, but it's a very, you can say it's an existential crisis kind of a thing.
Yeah.
It pushes you back, and with this challenge, I lost 2 stories, two ground stories which I thought that I would be doing. I failed to do so. So because I was not allowed to go further, and if at all I would succeed, it could only happen if I have someone very close from my contact into the district police administration, which would who would know uh, my past, my intentions, and then would allow me to go, or would assist me to further on my report. But that really doesn't happen every time, like once in 100 times. That is the point.
Yeah, so I think so. The biggest challenge, from what I could understand, is about penetration.
Absolutely.
Obviously, because you don't have an identity card from a established media house to show. That's a real challenge for an independent journalist on the ground, and it is something that's also very difficult to maneuver, unless, as you said, sometimes you have a very close friend or a very close contact who probably will be able to get you through. But you have to be stubborn on the ground as well, and you have to be convincing enough on the ground as well, to be able to convince authorities and people about your profession, about your identity. And because we are all in the pursuit of stories, and stories is what we tell, because
Right.
we believe that they need to be told. Uh, my next question, Saurav, to you is, and I think you already mentioned about that a few times earlier. And this is a question that I can ask for every working journalist, independent journalist, as well as would-be journalist, is how much money does an independent journalist make? Does an independent journalist make enough money to earn his or her livelihood? Or is there enough work available? Can an independent journalist, by doing stories of his own and pitching to independent organizations, media, even established media outlets, will they earn enough to sustain their livelihood?
Uh, the answer would not be in yes or no, to be sorry, but part of it is yes. The first part is yes, it's possible because I have tried and I'm doing it. The larger part of the challenge is uh, when there is a uh, in my case it was a choice to switch over from one place to the other, but I was very aware about the underlying challenge. So the choice and challenge still till today and for the future discourse, they run parallel. So I choose my stories, I choose my subject, but the challenge of getting pay on time, getting the required payment is also a very big challenge, and which I have faced. I have I have faced and I'm facing right now, but the intensity has come down because I have couple of friends who are independent journalists, double than my experience into the field, and they are making good money because they have a hell lot of work to show as their credibility to the organizations, be it national or foreign, and they are earning. But I'm yet to enter that phase. But as per my experience, it's really really very tough to sustain until unless you have fooding and lodging of your own. That is the reason I chose my village. It had a reason. मुझे घर का भाड़ा नहीं लगता और खाने के पैसे नहीं लगते. I had my own land and grains and vegetables. So this was one particular point in my hindsight, and then only I took this step. But that is not enough to carry on the livelihood, because when you earn, you need to save, and then you need to carry on the upcoming tasks, whatever you aspire to. So it's really tough to sustain, but it's never ever impossible, because if you keep on trying, you keep on publishing report, with every report the credential gets added to your you can say profile, to be very appropriate. That credibility matters a lot, and in 3 years I have seen that. So if from a not coming from a academic background of journalism, I can write an elaborate report for the Caravan. So you it's I think evident that hard work continues, hard work will pay off. Yes.
Correct, correct. I think the underlying thing is that, uh, I mean, one point that you mentioned very clearly is about being aware of the challenges before you start is very important.
Exactly.
Being aware of one's limitations and one's strength is also an important thing to remember. At the same time, I think as far as the journey of an independent journalist is concerned, is like the journey of a journalist even working in a newsroom. I mean, when you start off, you don't start at a very high salary. And as you move, as you spend years learning, as you spend years writing, then you move up the ladder and you become a senior reporter to a principal correspondent, and your earning also goes up. I think the same, as you mentioned correctly, goes for an independent journalist. I mean, For someone who is into independent journalism for 10 years or 15 years, they have built a reputation in with thousands of stories that they have done with multiple publications, that they have built a reputation and their credential to such a level, it won't be that difficult for them to sustain their livelihood. When you are starting off, it might be difficult. The first year will be very difficult. The second year उससे थोड़ा कम difficult होगा. Third year उससे थोड़ा कम difficult होगा. And eventually you will move on to that phase where it will not be difficult.
Right.
So that's how the journey will happen, I guess.
Right.
Thank you for sharing that insight on the financial part of earning as an independent journalist. Those are my questions, and now I'll start taking the questions that I have already received from the participants. So the first question that comes from Ashish is, this is very specific to rural reporting. His question is it more difficult to pitch stories about rural problems to news organizations?
Okay. No, it's rather I would put it the other way. It's not difficult to pitch. It's really difficult to get accepted because that genre is not the focal point of predominantly across the media fraternity. There are very less organizations who focus this particular you can say subject, and being being I inherited this of my own, the particular subject of rural. So it was a very calculated risk I thought to take because the you can I was not sure that stories always they would get a green signal, they would get accepted and published. But yes, at some point of time, a realization exists in mind of the editorial team or editors of any media house that sometimes there are stories which catch frame sight of the audience at least for a day. So that is where I don't think that it's very tough. It's like it should be done because rural India or rural you can say rural stories are the one which reflect rural India, the larger part of our demography. So that's not tough. Rather, our technique of pitching it uh, remains the decisive factor on its fate. Yes.
So I guess that answer your question, Ashish. In pitching is not difficult. Acceptance of that story is sometimes difficult, but you can work around that with your pitch. Make a very strong pitch for a rural story, and you will get accepted, and it will get published. The next question comes again from the next question comes from Joydeep. His question is, are there any specific challenges that you might face when it comes to rural reporting?
Yeah. Rather, it's a very nice question. I missed out talking on it. The one of the biggest challenge in rural reporting is the logistics, because until unless you have your own vehicle, you are bound to fail. You're bound to fail to report on time, or you are bound to fail to reach out to the desired place or to the subject, because there are uncertainties. Roads are sometimes not up to your mark. Like it was a monsoon season, and every monsoon, this monsoon, I'm not in Bihar, but every monsoon, my reporting, I used to do reporting, ground reporting, and every time I used to take one day, you can say I used to plan a day ahead of my schedule because half of the places were drowned and everywhere there was water. So logistics is one such problem because the train connectivity the road connectivity should be very very good for that case, or else it's very tough. Like in, for example, in Bihar, it was really tough for me. So more than 90% of the story is I did it by using trains and buses. Yes, that is it.
Okay, so that's your answer, Joydeep. That when it comes to rural reporting, the most specific challenge that Saurav mentioned is about logistics, and to be more specific, it's about transportation. So he kind of plans his stories in advance. He gives that time frame because he knows that he might face certain challenges in logistics and transportation. Okay, the next question comes from Kusumika Das. Her question is, what is the impact of this pandemic
Okay.
on independent journalists?
Hmm. Uh, that's also a very practical question. Very good question. The biggest limitation which has come in front of the independent fraternity is there are there are many media houses who have lit, who have practically turned down, they have shut the options of taking stories from independent journalists, and the reason stands out to be their finances. Their dwindling finances across independent media houses has brought, or you can say posed, a very big existential crisis for independent journalists. I also face this, but not at a very large scale. But when I pitched stories after, or you can say before going to Bastar, or after come from uh, after returning from Bastar, it they got turned out turned down, and the reason stands out to be the finances. So this is one big challenge. Opportunities have really come down. You need to be very specific whom you need to pitch, so that the rejection doesn't come in. And if at all the media houses are too much vehement in not accepting any story idea from any other outsider, then anyway they're not going to do it. But if your story has that caliber, and if you maintain that rapport, then there are chances to like, get the acceptance. But the opportunities are, they're fallen down, at least from 2020. Yes.
Yeah, I think he's right, and also I think to be very honest, that pandemic has had an impact on literally every industry, and it has an impact on media as well. As Saurav mentioned about financial troubles in the media organizations during the pandemic because of advertising revenue dropping. So they had to cut down on a lot of budgets, and obviously, uh, as sort of mentioned, that earlier they would probably say yes to a pitch, but now they would say, no, Baba, wait, I don't
Yeah.
have the money to pay you, so let's wait for some time. And it's the same, guys. A lot of journalists in the last 1 year, 1.5 years, they have even lost their jobs, their full-time jobs,
Exactly.
because a lot of news organizations had to kind of retrench journalists because they were facing financial crunch, and as a result, the newsroom had to be curtailed the number of people. They cut down on resources, and even a lot of working journalists have lost jobs in the past year and a half. And no wonder independent journalists would face that kind of a crisis during the pandemic as well.
Hmm.
So I hope, Kusumika, your question was answered by Saurav. Okay, so the next question comes from Shataki. His question is, and I think you mentioned this couple of times. His question is it difficult to venture into journalism without a formal journalism education background?
No, certainly not. It's not at all impossible. Rather, I think the basic requirement to get into this business, or not certainly business, this field, is to have basic understanding of English, right? And basic usage, and uh, as the time passes off, that use should be very very refined. uh, you need to express things in short span of time with limited words. That is all about journalism in today's time. Like, as an independent journalist, if you supposedly pitch a story and it gets accepted, and the time comes when you submit the draft, one of the reactions I have got, it's a very lengthy story. So that was a learning. कि within a very you can say limited reach of words, that expression should be up to the mark, and then you can pull it off. Like, it's not impossible. So degree in sense uh, is one aspect of journalism which will make you technically sound periodically. That doesn't happen in independent journalistic fraternity. But yes, individuals do aspire, while doing reports, they parallelly read, they parallelly undertake writing courses and different kinds of courses which make them sound to sustain. That is the thing.
So I hope your question was answered, that it's not mandatory or is not an absolute necessary to have a journalism education, to have a formal journalism education to venture into journalism. I mean, even I have seen a lot of my colleagues uh, who have ventured into journalism. They had absolutely no formal journalism education. They came from very different backgrounds. Some came from commerce background, some came from science background, some came from arts background, but different. Some came from history, some were major in history, major in political science. Even they have come into journalism and done brilliantly. So it's not mandatory. It's good to have because you learn certain skills, certain technical skills, which I'm pretty sure people coming from other subjects into journalism, they have to learn on the job while they are working. They learn those skills, but
Right.
journalism students will learn them in their courses itself. Thank you, Saurav, for answering that question. The next question comes from Niloy Chatterjee. His question is, let me see if I can frame this correctly. So his question is about the rural education sector.
Hmm.
And he's saying that how independent journalism is being able to portray the rural education sector. I think what he wants to say is the rural education sector getting enough coverage? Is independent journalists covering that sector well? How is the rural education sector getting covered?
Uh, before pandemic, I think episodically, like in local dailies of Hindi paper, or in Bengali. I don't know what Bengali, but in Hindi dailies, uh, once in a month, like debilitated schools infrastructure, they used to get traction, space. But after pandemic, this totally, like, you can say it vanished, because the schools got shut, and the subject of reporting, as per conventional journalists, it just vanished into thin air. But practically the challenge deepened down, because as the they got shut, the there is a big slot of children in the villages who have literally fallen out of the mainstream education, and that itself is a very big story. if
Yes.
you if you see my NewsClicks profile, my last story of this month was on a tribal hamlet where 60 above children of primary school, they have literally forgotten everything, because they are out of touch, and they are not economically sound to fetch a smartphone to have the updated online classes.
Correct.
So I think it used to get that space, rural education, and pandemic has brought many opportunities to look deeper and to get a very multidimensional aspect of what's the real crisis of rural education. It's being reported, yes, but not at that scale it should have been, I think.
Yeah, I think Niloy, what Saurav is mentioning is not just in a case in point in Bihar. It's a case in point in probably the entire country. I mean, there's a very large rural uh, education sector where the students do not have access to smartphones, do not have access to internet. So while the entire urban part of the country, they evolved and went into online teaching, and they have now everybody, the universities, the colleges, the schools, everybody adopted online teaching. I mean, the rural part has fallen back. I mean, they did not have the infrastructure in place. They did not have, the families don't have, they are not economically sound to buy smartphones, to have internet connection. So that entire region, as he mentioned, I mean, they have been completely out of touch as far as their education is concerned. It's a very, very difficult path to get all those kids back to school once again and again get that, the education, their education getting back to where it was before the pandemic. It's going to be a pretty long and difficult fight to get these kids again back to school, face-to-face classes, and again, get them the kind of education that they deserve.
True.
So it's going to be a tough, tough battle. Okay, the next question, probably this is going to be the last one I take, and this is a very, very interesting question from Omkar. His question is, if you had a magic wand, if
Okay.
you had a magic wand, which three challenges, which three challenges would you like to be solved as an independent journalist? So if you had a magic wand, you know all the challenges that you face as an independent journalist. So which are the three challenges you want solved with that magic wand? Which are those three challenges?
Okay. The first one would be the respectable pay. The first one would be the respectable pay. I would use my magic wand to just ensure that an independent journalist working day and night onto the ground, fetching details and reality, must at any cost get the desired and respectable pay, which this country at least doesn't follow. It's an open criticism and it's a bitter truth.
Absolutely.
The second would be, you can say, being an independent journalist, the penetration into every sector of society, be it any government office, be it any place, or be it anything. An independent journalist should be capable enough with his or her uh, oral, you can say, fetched out details to go at any place, report, and come back.
So to be very specific, it's about access. So independent
In
journalists,
one word, in one word.
one word is the access. They should be able to access every government official, every authority, everywhere. They should not have any hurdles in, as Saurav had mentioned earlier, he could not go to a place because he did not have an identity card or he did not have the credentials to show. So it's about access. You should be able to access anybody, anywhere, anytime. That's the second thing he wants solved.
Exactly. And last but not the least, I would ensure at least India should have n number of, you can say, uh, n number of uh, fellowships bound to India, not beyond India. Means there are many opportunities lying outside countries, but uh, within India, lot more opportunities are yet to be you can say, taken up. I applied for a couple of them, but there were only two options where I like somehow I failed. But this thing came to my mind. There are really not major opportunities where you get a grant to travel here and there and just report. This should be a common practice, at least for uh, independent journalists in India, which is, I think, has bloomed up, but it is very, very far from taking good space. It is that.
Absolutely. I think you have touched the right point. In fact, in the West, in Europe
Hmm,
and in US,
exactly.
there are lots of universities, there are lots of research institutes, there are lots of non-government organizations who actually grant and provide funds to independent journalists, not organizations, to go and to a country or to a city or to a village and do in-depth reporting, come back and publish their stories for them. So there's a lot of such opportunities in the West, especially in US and Europe, where I mean I know there are some of my ex-colleagues who basically uh, after working for a certain time in a news organization, they quit their job and they have been just doing that. They have got grants from NGOs. They have even they get grants from like the Bill and the Melinda Gates Foundation will give you grant. Go to Namibia, go to Somalia. They go there to those countries. They spend 2-3 months. They come back with ground reports and stories and so many of them. But that entire trip, their entire cost is borne by the foundation,
Exactly.
and on top of that you get also paid for the work that you are doing. So unfortunately in India, as Saurav rightly pointed out, you don't have such opportunities.
Right. Right.
It's really sad uh, that it's not there. In fact, I mean, there was, I think, at one point of time, a lot of talk in the corporate circle that while they are doing CSR, I mean,
Hmm.
now everybody is bound to do CSR, the corporate social responsibility, but it's not just about giving back to the society in terms of, planting trees or getting schools done, healthcare done. Yes, it's important, but also it's also important about letting journalists funds so that these people can go to the various stretches of the country that people really don't know about. People really don't know what is the problem on the ground. Only once you know the problem, you will be coming forward to probably solve it.
Exactly.
As sort of mentioned, 80% of Bihar is villages, and you will only there is a trouble reporting enough stories from those villages because they don't get the limelight. So think of the so many problems that are already existing. Saurav may know of many of them. He may have pitched many of them. Many of them may have got published. But I think more than what he has been able to report, I think there are many more which he has not been able to report.
Exactly.
And so those stories, once they are reported, only then you will get to know the problems, and then only we can solve those problems. So, but we don't really, there are no such funds available for independent journalists to go and take up those assignments, do a very deep and descriptive report and research work, and come back and publish them so that those things get addressed. I think the most important satisfaction for any journalist, whether a working journalist in a media organization or an independent journalist, is not to see his or her byline coming out in print or in digital or in broadcast, is to see that once his story has been his or her story has been published or reported or shown in TV, people have taken action. The authorities have taken action and they have corrected the situation or corrected the anomaly. The problem has been solved. That is the biggest satisfaction that a journalist can have, that yes, I have reported about something, authorities have taken note and they have solved it. They have tried to solve it. You see action. That's the biggest satisfaction that I have seen in my career as a journalist, that when you see that you report something, you report a problem, sorry, and that problem has been taken note and that problem has been solved. That's the biggest success. Anyway, so Omkar, I hope your your very interesting question was answered as way you wanted. So it's pay, respectable pay, it's access, and third is the opportunities where funds and grants can be provided to journalists so that they can go and work independently at different places with complete freedom. So these are the three challenges that he wants solved. Thank you so much for all those questions. And we are almost out of time. In fact, we have just crossed 6 o'clock. So it's exactly on time. Thank you, Saurav, for sharing your wonderful journey. I think everybody here learned a lot, especially learned a lot about the challenges when it comes to rural reporting, the challenges on the ground about access and penetration and logistics. But at the same time, don't buckle down. You have to buckle up and keep doing it, because that's what is most essential part of journalism.
Certainly.
It was lovely having you. It was lovely talking to you. It was a delight. And thank you for coming here and sharing your story. And I hope you keep telling such stories, such wonderful stories, and you soar very, very high as an independent journalist in the country. Thank you so much. And we will be back next week again with another guest, another independent journalist who will be sharing the story. And I'll come back to all of you. Keep checking my social media pages. You will know who that journalist is. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anjan. Thank you very
Saurav.
much.
Thank you, Saurav. We will be in touch. And thank you, everyone, for joining in. Thank you.
Sure.
Goodbye.
Thanks again.